Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cheer Chronicles podcast. It's your host, Rosie, and we are so excited to be back. We have electricity, we have internet, all the things after the back-to-back storms between Helene and Milton. We are doing okay. Looking forward to some nice weather these next few days and getting rid of hurricane season because I am over it. I am still not over Hurricane Ian, so how dare these storms come over here? We don't want them to go anywhere, to be honest, but out to sea for sure. So apart from the storms, we have been pretty busy planning different episodes coming up on the podcast. This episode that you are about to listen to is super duper important. It is about mental health and young athletes, and we bring kind of a specific look at competitive cheerleading and mental health. I am just super excited about this episode. I know that it's not going to be like a super funny episode, which I know you all enjoy, but it is definitely an important message that we bring. I was joined by two experts. I just am so grateful that they were able to find the time to come and sit on my little podcast with my two viewers and listeners, and I am just beyond grateful for that. So I bring on the first person I'm going to introduce is Sam McDonald. He is a seasoned psychotherapist at the David Lawrence Center, specializing in crisis intervention and comprehensive mental health support. With 8 years of dedicated experience in the field, Sam has cultivated a profound understanding of the complexities of mental health and the essential role that empathetic engagement plays in fostering effective therapeutic relationships. Sam earned a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling from Palo Alto University, where they honed their expertise in evidence-based therapeutic modalities. This training, as well as their research of human psyche, informs their clinical practice, which is intensely centered on empowering clients to navigating a wide range of mental health challenges, from anxiety and depression to trauma and crisis management. Recognizing that the true healing occurs within a safe, non-judgmental environment, Sam is unwavering in their commitment to creating therapeutic spaces that invite open exploration of emotions and personal experiences. By fostering an atmosphere built on trust and respect, Sam enables clients to confront their vulnerabilities, facilitating meaningful growth and resilience. Sam is dedicated to making a lasting impact on their clients' journeys towards mental wellness, one insightful session at a time. And when you listen to Sam on this episode, his voice is so calming, at least I felt that way. Just the way he explains things, it was like a constant light bulb for me coming up. I just felt like, wow, I didn't think of it that way before. So super grateful Sam was able to be on the podcast. Next up is Dr. Marcela Alvarez Lazo, who is a graduate of the University of Miami, go Canes, with her doctorate in nursing practice and dual board certified as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and an adult acute care nurse practitioner with over 15 years of experience in nursing. She is currently practicing as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner at a crisis stabilization unit and is the founder and CEO of Courageous Living Mental Health Consultants, along with her partner Sarah Lang, who is also a nurse practitioner, and Dr. Paul Wurst, who is a child, adolescent, and general psychiatrist. Their contact information, admin@clmentalhealth.org. For more information, if anyone listening to this at the end of this episode, if you feel you need to speak to someone or you just want a little more information on getting in contact with both Dr. Alvarez and Sam, please let me know. give us, DM us, whatever you need to do. As I know that so many folks are, either they struggle with mental health or, they just want to learn a little more about it. These definitely are the folks to help you do that. Side note, story time, Marcella and I went to University of Miami together, and we graduated last year with our doctorate degrees, and that's how we met. Well, we actually met because I coach her kids in cheerleading. But so one day she was picking up her child from practice, and I went up to the car to say hi, and she was like, yeah, I just applied for my DMP program a few days ago at UM. And I was like, really? I really want to go back to school and get my doctorate as well. And it has always been a dream of mine to go to UM, and she didn't even know that I had lived in Miami all my life. And so we just embarked on that journey together, driving over all those weekends for 2 years to attend classes, working on our DMP projects together. We did so many papers, so many projects during that time, and it was just such a blessing to have her with me on that program because it was not easy at all. But we got through it. Both of us did. Both, full-time nurse practitioners, moms, all the things. We made it. And so super proud of her, super proud to know her. And she is brilliant. And so is Sam. I am just so excited for this episode. Please enjoy. Thank you so much for listening to the Cheer Chronicles podcast.
Come on, y'all. Welcome to the Cheer Chronicles podcast with Rosie.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Cheer Chronicles podcast. I am here today with Dr. Alvarez, who's a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and Sam, who is a mental health counselor. And we're here to talk about mental health and youth sports, emphasis on competitive cheerleading. Obviously, this is the Cheer Chronicles, so that's what we're doing. I am so excited to have you guys on the podcast. Thank you both for taking the time. We're going to get started. Are we ready? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so how does participating in competitive sports affect a young athlete's mental health, both positively and negative?
It affects it in a number of different ways. I guess first off, positively, we can think of it. It helps boost that self-esteem, confidence in oneself. It actually helps with connectivity, finding a little bit of meaning in connecting, not being as isolated. You're actually, goal-oriented. Right. It helps build discipline. It helps do a number of things positively, just psychologically. On the negative aspect of things, I think, first thing that comes off my mind is just this fear that is instilled, the fear of failure. Mm-hmm. That's kind of probably the main one. I mean, you look at people who are in sports oftentimes, like, let's say, Olympic athletes. A lot of the times we can find that they're very closely in line with perfectionists. Right. And understanding a perfectionist, they have these high expectations for themselves, yet they have this fear of failure. That's their one motivation. Mm-hmm. And so when they miss the mark on that expectation, a lot of the times what they do is they go immediately inward. They feel ashamed, they feel guilty, they mull over these ideas about themselves that actually can damage the self-image and then just sends them into this downward spiral.
Right, very type A personalities.
Right, yes.
Not me with a type A personality.
I hope not.
And also positively, it helps them decompress from their, life responsibilities and school responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And I think negatively, of course, with their grades, you can definitely see that effect in their grades if they start struggling with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think in terms of competitive cheer, we don't only just have, hey, we have practice, 2 times a week for 2 hours. Then it's, we have extra things like the tumbling classes or this or that. So it's an every night situation where, your grades could be affected because you're doing something every night. Sometimes, like my daughters don't finish practice till 9:30 at night. We don't get home till 10. They definitely have to prepare mentally every week to make sure that they get their other responsibilities met.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so important, at least for children and adolescents, to have that guidance from not only parents but also the coaches, and encouraging them to find that balance, because as us as adults, we have found, for the most part, that balance of having that professional world and then the personal world.
Right.
And we want to have that balance instilled in our children before they get into that independent stage in their life where they're transitioning into young adulthood.
Yeah, thank you for that answer. What are some of the most common mental health challenges faced by young athletes today, would you guys say? For example, like, I feel in competitive cheer sometimes, being a certain weight, or, that will affect not only your mental health, but your health overall. So in years past, and I think it's something that we don't really talk about in any sports really, but making sure that, again, going back to that type A personality and perfectionist, saying I need to meet this goal, and to be a certain position in a certain team, I need to be, what they would call, like, I need to be tiny, I need to be able to fly, and if I'm too heavy, then they won't be able to put me up, in the air. So those are things that I feel maybe might be affecting them, and that's probably something that people aren't talking about as much. It's a very delicate subject.
I mean, I think that it kind of relates to, the first question of that negative aspect, some of the things that are experienced just on the psychological level. You find the fear of failure is there, but I guess it proposes at least the question for me: are these self-imposed expectations, or is it expectations that are imposed by the external experience? Society at large. We look at just our country macro level. There's these things that are kind of very in our face. You look at social media, for instance, the highlights of people's life. It's really just the surface level that we're seeing. We don't see all of the struggle, the pains, the sufferings that they're going through behind the scenes.
Right.
We're just seeing, the good moments. And that, just witnessing that surface level, it almost creates this fantasy land in our minds, and thinks that is the life that we want to live on a day-to-day basis. But that's not a realistic expectation. I don't know where that really begins in terms of that being a self-imposed expectation, or this maybe just more subtle kind of imposed expectation that society puts onto us.
And then, of course, all of that leads to the other mental health illnesses, like depression, anxiety, stress, PTSD even sometimes, depending on the situation.
And I think with cheer too, there are certain times where, we might be trading a flyer in and out to see who has more flexibility, more, certain skills that they may need, whatever it may be. So yeah, it's a lot of pressure mentally on them, not only physically, because they have to do stretches every night. They have to send in videos to the coaches to show that you are stretching so that you could get that flyer spot.
Right.
But yeah, I'm sure a lot of it is internally, hey, I need to meet this, and if I don't meet this is what happens. But also externally, I think we do, as coaches, put a lot of pressure on them.
Right.
Yeah, even if it's not explicitly stated, it is implicitly applied or implied.
Yeah, for sure. Next question: how can young athletes maintain a healthy balance between the pressures of competition and their mental well-being?
I think, in my opinion, based on what I see, also being a cheer parent, I think that them speaking, giving them like that space to just kind of let you know what's on their minds, giving them that time just to listen, or to, if, depending on if they are asking for some advice or if they just want to be heard. I think that's huge.
Yeah.
Whether it's from, the parent, even coaches or others, teammates. I think that's part of something that can be very beneficial for them to kind of let out and express their emotions.
Yeah.
Because they feel like they have to bottle them up and they have to be tough and they have to be on all the time.
Yeah.
And so when they have that space, that safe space that they can feel like they can talk about it, it's huge. Does wonders for their mental health.
Cultivating that communicative, open environment is very difficult, I feel, for a lot of children. I mean, probably they're not used to it in their home setting, let's say, and then they come to the school setting where they're practicing and doing sports and all this kind of stuff, and this school setting, let's say, is a more open environment. It's vastly different than their home experience, so it's like they're trying to grapple internally, what am I supposed to do, what is the right and what is the wrong in this situation. I think communication is key in finding the support that you need. I mean, it's much easier to support something that you understand, but getting the child to communicate in the first place is very difficult. I think instilling some sort of maybe value set early on in life is going to help them to communicate a little bit better. Thinking kind of a holistic approach, we look at the human person almost from 5 different aspects. You have the physical sense, the mental, the emotional, you have the social aspect, and then a mindful component to that, or another word for that could be like spirituality.
Right.
But in each of these aspects, these pillars, we have to have a balance. If we neglect one aspect, then of course all the others are going to suffer, like that mindful aspect, so that idea of being present, of being engaged with the present moment as much as possible and do it with intention. If we're not doing that, well then we find ourselves maybe gravitating towards fixations on the past or the future. And these fixations on the past and the future, these things that are outside of our control, they produce anxiety, depression. And so now we see that it's affecting the mental and the emotional aspect. And of course, if we're depressed, anxious, then we lose our motivation, we lose our meaning, and it affects our physicality.
Right.
So we can't get out of bed in the morning, or we can't go out and socialize like we should be. You know, we're very social creatures, and connecting and finding meaning through that connection. So instilling kind of this holistic approach of taking care of the self and instilling this idea of finding that balance, I think, is the first step, so that those kids will have that awareness that they do need to reach out, that they need to do all of these things for themselves so that they can find that support.
Yeah.
Because of course we can't do life alone.
And to let them know that they're accepted regardless of whether, they do cheer or any other sport. And regardless of whether they're successful or not, that there's still a deeper meaning to their life other than the sport.
Yeah. I think sometimes too, as a coach, sometimes I'm like, I wonder if this athlete is liking the sport, especially if they're new, at least to my team. And, then I talk to the parents and they're like, they love it. And I'm like, okay, even if they're having those hard practices, and I'm like, are you enjoying this? Like, are you finding, obviously in cheer, everybody has such a vital role in the routine and all the things we do. But sometimes I'm like, I'm not, they're hard to read. So I'm like, I'm not sure. And then the parents are like, yeah, they love it. And then I realize that there's more to it than just, hey, I had a bad practice today, or, I'm not used to this position on the team, but I'm, going to learn it or whatnot. So, yeah, I think, and it reminds me of COVID, when we had to do homeschool, and my daughter just was not the same person. She would have rather have gone to school, mask, no mask, and like a hazmat suit, as long as she got to go out and be social. And we saw that being affected, like in her, like, she's not herself. Her attitude towards her parents changed, and then we went back to school, and that was back to normal.
Yeah,
I had that same exact experience too, and so everything changed once the socialization aspect was resumed. So
yeah, which was a good thing. So how does the pressure to perform at a high level impact the mental health of young athletes? I have to just give a little story time here. I am very close to an athlete who every time there's a high, because especially with cheer, we're out there 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and we work months and months and months for those 2 minutes and 30 seconds. So our routine is 2 minutes and 30 seconds, and we work 7 months to go out there on the mat and do that routine. And so many things could go wrong, and most of the time they do. Things happen that you're like, that never happened before. We didn't even think of that, to prepare, to think of this. But that level of, we are now here preparing all these months, and here we go. I'm close to an athlete who gets chest pain, and it's that pain of, you know, kind of like a minor panic attack. Like, I feel like I can't breathe. I start to get a little dizzy, she'll tell you. And it's just at that moment. It's not an everyday. It's not an everyday practices, but it's at that moment that we're going to go and perform, especially if it's not just a regular comp, but like, you know, all-star worlds where you're competing against 100-something teams. That level of not letting your team down and not being that athlete that messed up or fell or did something wrong. And I've tried to tell her, just take a deep breath. I also know of some athletes that get so anxious, like they don't drink anything all day. They, I'm not feeling well now because you haven't had anything to eat. And, I didn't get enough sleep because I'm so anxious. I mean, I know that it happens to everyone, but that high level of, this is on me, like I have to make this happen. Sometimes I find myself as a coach and as a parent, like, how do we handle that? What do I tell you right now? Because we're about to go on in like 5 minutes and you're over here like, oh, my chest hurts. So what are your suggestions?
I think that's when, prior to that, they should have already learned some like coping skills to how to manage their anxiety levels and to bring it to a manageable level. Some can be like you said, deep breathing. That's very important, very useful. Grounding techniques. Do you want to go into those?
Yeah.
I think those are great.
Yeah, grounding techniques, things that just shift your attention to the present moment, things that are within your control. All emotions stem from just our fixation on things that are outside of our control. Even think of like anger. Anger is an emotion that almost always stems from even the present moment, but it's in relation to, let's say, somebody else. Somebody else is doing a certain behavior, they have a perspective, their emotions, whatever. You cannot control that individual. But the more that you try to, the more irritated, agitated you become.
See, I need to take notes.
And so what you need to do, instead of fixating and trying to change the reality of that individual, what you do is you refine your approach, your reality to that particular reality. It also, I think, in dealing with this, it's about shifting our perspective as well. I oftentimes, with a lot of the clients that I work with, I help them try to visualize themselves maybe climbing a mountain, where they find themselves at the base of the mountain, and what they're doing is they're looking up at the peak. And when they look at that peak and they stare at that peak a little bit too long, they start to stress. They start to ask themselves, what if this is impossible for me to do? Then they start getting anxious, and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. It's going to be a long, arduous journey for me. But instead of focusing on some place that you are not at currently, what you need to do is you need to bring your attention back to where you're actually at, the reality of the self in the present moment, which is at the base of the mountain. And then what you do after you've recognized where you're at is you say, okay, what can I do right in this moment? Well, I can take step number 1. And I'm going to focus my fullest attention to that step. And once I do that, and I accomplish that, well, then I do that with the subsequent step. And the other steps following. Each and every step in the process of climbing this mountain requires your fullest attention. Then sooner or later, you find yourself at that peak.
Right.
You focused on the process of climbing that mountain as opposed to some sort of end goal itself. And so when we look at sports, oftentimes we're looking at that end goal. I want to do great. I want to be perfect in my routine. I want to win first place. Whatever the desire is of that moment cannot be had in that moment. So all you have to do is focus on the step-by-step process that gets you to that moment.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I need to do that in my own life. So here's something that I know I need to do better with as a parent and a coach, but what role do parents and coaches and teammates play in either alleviating or increasing performance anxiety in these athletes?
Glad you asked.
Yeah, I feel like I don't do very well. Like I'm very much concentrate on what you're doing. We need to get the job done. So I can't say that I alleviate the pressure.
I was actually reading a few studies on this, and they have actually studied it extensively. And it's like two types of coaching. It's the coaches that are like they pretty much are like dominant, and they want everything like the way it is, the way they want it to be, versus the coaches that are a little bit more like athlete. They have a little bit more autonomy, and those obviously do a lot better.
The athletes who have a little more
with
autonomy.
the coaches with autonomy, that promote autonomy, versus the ones that are like control based coaching, and that's hard. I can't imagine doing coaching at all. But it must be a very difficult position to be in. But I found that those articles were very interesting. To give them a little bit more autonomy than what they may have, or
Okay. I mean, it makes sense.
Although I can't imagine that, because you are, like Sam said, you're wanting to get to that end goal.
Yeah, and I don't know how to give them autonomy in a routine.
Right. You have to
You gotta do this.
You gotta guide them through every step of
There
the
are
routine.
years where some of them are like, "Hey, coach, this isn't working.
So I don't know if that
this
pertains to
instead?"
coaching, or just like cheer coaching, or just coaching
in general. Yeah, yeah. Or as a parent too, I feel. I don't know. Even as a parent, I watch practice sometimes, and I'm not a coach. I'm just watching as a parent, and I'm like, "Hey, do this and this and this and this," and that's probably not helping because I'm adding. It sounds like stop doing that.
We
like,
do
please,
give them feedback, but I mostly listen to them, and if they ask for feedback, I give it to them. If they don't,
that's hard. And I know for some of my cheer moms, that's hard to do because sometimes they get in the car and they're like, "What did you think?"
They can be very self-critical.
I
and
don't
they can beat
think you
up.
did this, and I think you did that, and this was good, and
I feel like I emphasize the positive usually in their lives overall, especially when they mess up or do something or fall at one of the...
Write all of these down.
And kind of minimize the negatives, but still talk about them, like let them have an open dialogue. But I always go for the positives. Anything that is positive that I can highlight, that's what I do. I find that that's pretty helpful, at least as a parent.
Yeah.
No, Sam?
Yeah.
Well, I
What should
think,
we be doing?
I mean, it almost seems as though maybe there's no cookie cutter approach to it. Like you can have one way that works wonders for one person, one type of individual. Like we'll look at boot camp in the military. So these drill sergeants who are drilling these soldiers and refining them and helping them evolve into this perfect soldier. That's one way of getting from point A to point B. But then you have the more empathetic approach. I think at the end of the day, maybe it operates more so like a relationship. When you look at a relationship, oftentimes what people are doing is they're traveling down two separate paths. And what they're doing is they're trying to communicate across the way, and a lot of the times these words are they're falling short. They're falling somewhere in the middle, not falling on the ears of the other individual. In an ideal relationship, what we want to see is some sort of, walking towards the middle, meeting each other where we're in the middle somewhere, finding that common ground, and then, continuing to walk down that path together. But of course, that's in an ideal relationship.
Right.
Oftentimes, what we have to do is we have to have one individual have this willingness to walk all the way over to the other individual, understand where they're at, and then through that understanding we begin to inspire change. And maybe we'll say they gravitate towards that middle, the compromise area, or who knows, maybe all the way over to the other path that was taken previously by the other individual.
Yeah.
So the idea here, I think, is really meeting that individual where they're at. I mean, we look at a sports team, for instance, it almost operates much like a family. So a family is a collective unit, but it's a unit that's consisted of a bunch of individuals. And all of these individuals are unique in their own way. But of course, if these individuals are working on themselves individually, then they'll have that awareness to begin to work with other people because they know that that collective unit needs to work as one singular independent unit. A team is very much the same, where you have, maybe the coach, head coach, and assistant coach who are operating almost like the parents, and then you have the children. And so what the parents do, because the children are probably not going to try to make that journey all the way across the way, the parents have to walk all the way over and then meet the individual where they're at. Of course, doing that with 30 or so kids on a team can take a long time, but over the course of maybe, a couple weeks, couple of months, you begin to get to know who is who and who has these unique characteristics, and then how to cater to their unique characteristics and what they can absorb most.
Yeah. I see, some of my athletes I've been coaching for a while, and some I haven't. Some are brand new to me this year. But yeah, you get to know their strengths, both in the sport and mentally as well, like what they can handle, what they can't.
Right.
There's times where I'm like, I'm not going to approach this athlete with this because I know that, I'm kind of going to get this. I need to think about how I'm going to word it, how I'm going to bring it up. And I try and figure out their uniqueness. But yeah, it's difficult for them and for us as well, and keeping that anxiety at a level where it's manageable.
Yeah.
And this is, I feel like I'm probably seeing the superficial of it, where I'm sure the parents are like, they see a lot more.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so next question. How can young athletes manage the fear of failure or disappointment in sports? Especially, and I feel like we see also the superficial of this, where we came off the mat, we didn't do good, and automatic tears.
Yes,
and so,
especially the younger ones.
Right, but I feel how can we help them manage as at least the next few days to come? Like, when that's still super fresh. I feel some kids are like, yeah, I fell. Well, I'll do better next time. And some really take it to heart, where now, it's like they carry that with them.
Well, in life, there is two motivators. There's fear and there's love. And kind of that example of perfectionism that I gave earlier, where we have these perfectionists who have the fear of failure, these high expectations. But immediately the issue with having that motivation of fear is that you look inward, you feel guilty, you feel ashamed, whatever it may be. Now the opposite of that is an individual who simply strives for perfection. So they have this realistic mentality of, I know that I'm going to make a mistake. Everybody makes a mistake. But when I do make that mistake, I'm not going to take full accountability for it. Well, maybe I will, but what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to make it more transformative. And I'm going to try to reflect back, identify what went wrong, what led to that mistake, and then I'm going to take that wisdom and I'm going to apply it going forward.
That's the people we need to be.
Right. and that is what progresses them further, probably further than they ever expected before. So this is somebody who is motivated by a love of success, a love of the progress of things, where they look at the kind of the pains and sufferings of life, and it's almost like that Nietzschean idea of no pain, no gain. In order to gain something, we all go to the gym and we feel sore after going to the gym. Well, that's the same idea. That soreness helps us to gain that muscle. It's the same thing with anything in life. To build resilience, we have to embrace the reality of life. That includes the goods, the bads. Now, instilling that into young children is quite difficult, I would say. But I think maybe initially when they come off the mat and they're upset, it's empathizing, helping them process through that emotional experience. That's the first step. First, they have to recognize where they are in that emotional rise. Then they have to effectively respond. And then they effectively respond, reduce that symptomology. They get down to that baseline level of functioning where they're calm, cool, collected. That is where the reflections take place. Now when we're calm, we reflect back and say, okay, what went wrong? What am I supposed to learn from this? I did make a mistake. I'm not going to identify with that mistake. That's not who I am, but it did happen. So what can I do with this mistake? And then they obtain some sort of insight, and they put that insight going forward.
Yeah, I need to work on that too. I need to work on all these things, all of them. So next question, what resources should be available to young athletes to support their mental health that maybe you guys don't see as often? Or for me, to think about, taking my own kid to a mental health specialist, for me, automatically, I think, is it going to be covered by my insurance?
Yeah.
I think even before that, it's important for like schools to incorporate things, which I don't think happens very frequently.
Yeah.
Like groups, peer groups, mindfulness groups, just teaching them life skills,
and I think
skills.
I think in our situation, because our kids go to the same school, they have those mindfulness groups during lunch and stuff. But
in general, though, or most other schools, I don't think that's something that they really see or are able to learn. So if they don't get it from somewhere, then they're not going to be able to cope in these situations. And I think going to therapy, I think, isn't like the first step. I don't know how you feel about that. Sam.
I mean, I agree. I think, understanding therapy, it's really kind of this idea of just going to someone who has an unbiased point of view on your life, and this person can help you to identify certain things that you were not aware of before. And through that identification, you begin to grow and correct your ways or whatever it may be. Now, with the surface level treatment, that's kind of what we're talking about, just looking at our manifestations, emotions, perspectives, even the behaviors. That is done in the home setting, primarily, I would say. But then also, because children are at school for the vast majority of the week, I think it should be implemented into the school setting. Of course, the education system is not where we want it to be right now.
Right.
I think we've kind of gravitated away from the classical education of things, or we're, instilling these ideas of how to critically think and take care of the self a little bit more properly. I don't know if there's anything that we can do to correct that, individually, but at least in the home setting, what we can do is we can instill those types of values, where we, try to encourage our children to think a little bit more critically. Don't just give them the answer right off the bat. Don't just pass them because, they have to catch up with the rest of
Don't
the
ask
crowd.
Alexa.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Life should not
Or Google.
be easy. It's meant to be difficult, because that difficulty, again, like I've said before, is going to help us to grow. We need that pain to grow towards something better. Looking at evolutionary stages, the human race, all of what they've been through has been a refinement of things. If they didn't go through all of those things, they wouldn't find themselves here. They would find themselves still kind of swimming around as little kind of tadpole and not pushing themselves beyond their limits.
Yeah, I do have to say that in the school setting, I don't know, I feel, and maybe I'm wrong, but the counselors now that they have aren't counselors for, if you're having kind of a bad day and something traumatic happened, it's more of your academics and this is where you need to be and how are we going to get you to this school. And so, I know that they'll bring people in, obviously, if there's some sort of traumatic event at the school to speak to the kids, but there's not someone there for you to speak to.
Right.
I feel like, unless you go to your
Right.
teacher, which I'm sure is very helpful, but no one professional is there.
Right, and then if they don't get that, then, and if they're not getting it at home and they're not getting it at school, then that's, I think, where the problem lies.
Yeah. So, schools, we got to do better. And at home. Yeah. Okay, next question. How can athletes open up about their mental health struggles without fearing judgment or stigma? I feel that's difficult.
I think that
Like,
for
they
my
don't
kids,
really
that's-
want to talk about it.
Yeah, so I I'm a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner, so my kids are all about mental health. So they are not afraid of speaking up if they're feeling sad, if they're feeling anxious, if they have a problem, if there's bullying, if there's anything like that going on. But I feel like in general, a lot of families don't embrace that. So just more, speaking out.
Communication.
Yeah, speaking out, making more awareness of that not being a stigma. I feel like I do that everywhere I go because I would love to see more people be able to engage and, get the help they need. And sometimes they don't because they don't even believe mental health is an issue.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, and we're all so busy and one day turns into the next and then 3 months have gone by and you didn't, maybe your athlete came up and said, this happened today, and then you don't address it and life goes on, and then 6 months later you have a bigger issue. As a parent, I feel like that happens. But yeah, it's super difficult. What do you
think it's important to check in on our kids every single day, not just their homework, if they showered, if they ate, but also how do you feel? Are you depressed? There was a point that I even asked my kids, so how depressed do you feel? 0 to 5 or 0 to 10? How anxious are you feeling? And just because I wanted to get a gear on their mental health, situational things that were happening with school and things like that. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't falling behind and then I would have this problem 6 months down the line.
I find that those car rides to and
huge.
From school
that's where
is really where I get all my tea about their day and what's going on. And sometimes they'll already get in the car and be like, what happened today?
Or right before bedtime. And you're like, just go to bed. That's you have to make time to listen to them. Whenever they're available to open up.
Yeah, a lot of the times it's, especially from school to that cheer practice, that's usually where I get a lot of, this happened today and I forgot to tell you that. Whether it's sports related or something social or the teacher told me this and this comment was made. That's really where I get a lot of my information.
I agree on that.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if everyone does that, to be honest.
Yeah, I think it's naturally difficult to be vulnerable in general. For parents, it's all really kind of focusing on building the relationship a little bit more. We look at a relationship in general, and we look at that foundation. And what it consists of is two primary components, trust and respect. Now, of course, there's other components that contribute to that foundation, but these are the two primary ones that need to happen. So we look at that trust and respect, and if that is not there, then how would there be a relationship in general? How could your child trust you to give you this vulnerable information and trust that you're going to take this information and transform it into something better? So as a parent, it's all about trying to build that trust and respect with your child. There's two ways, or there's a certain specific way I think that you can do this. First off, we have to understand that trust and respect is built over time. So it's not established in one sitting or overnight or in 1 week. It takes several months.
And not to cut you off, but I'm totally cutting you off. I also don't think just because you're the authority figure does that come into play. Just because you're the authority figure doesn't mean I need to trust and respect you.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And then we've all come across angsty teens. Hormones are involved, and so they're like, "F off, mom," whatever it might be.
Or the eye rolls. My kids are good at that.
Exactly.
I'm gonna roll my eyes.
Yeah. So it takes time, but then also during that time, there has to be the right amount of effort. Looking at that effort and identifying what exactly that effort is very difficult for a lot of people. What I do is I actually begin to analyze maybe what causes damage in relationships, so conflicts, for instance. Let's just say an example of an argument. So we look at that argument and we see the development of it, and we see that it came to a certain conclusion, a conclusion that we didn't like, that we didn't expect, an outcome just we are uncomfortable experiencing. But if we start with that outcome and work our way back through the development, what we arrive is at the source of that conflict. And most often, probably I would say 99% of the time, it's rooted in some sort of misunderstanding.
Miscommunication.
Right.
Yeah.
So somebody communicated something, the other person misunderstood or misinterpreted what was being communicated to them, and then based on that misinterpretation, they communicated back, and that led to a further misunderstanding, miscommunication, whatever it may be, and then it escalates from there. So if at the source of a conflict is a misunderstanding, then in order to avoid conflict, we have to do the adverse of a misunderstanding, which is simply an understanding. So that is our sole goal in a relationship, is to understand. Because it's much easier to connect with something that you understand than if you don't understand.
Right.
So building that understanding is also very difficult for a lot of people to understand. We think communication, for instance, is a way of building that understanding, but there has to be a specific way of building that understanding. There's actually maybe 3 components that I can identify just off the top of my head. I would say the first is communicating the perspective appropriately, the self's perspective. Because we want to get that point across. We want to have the other person understand where we're coming from.
Like the whole put yourself in my shoes.
Right, exactly. Yeah. But we're trying to help them to understand just completely where we're coming at. So we have to formulate it in such a way that they will be receptive to that. So what we use is I statements. I understand it this way. I feel this way. I see it this way. I perceive it this way. Whatever it may be. I. That is all about the self. A lot of people, though, what they tend to do is they tend to maybe shift the attention on the other individual, and they say, you're doing this, and it's causing me to feel this way.
I'm glad my husband's not listening. He's downstairs.
Yeah. And so when we do that, they feel accused, they go on the defensive, they shut off their listening skills, which damages that ability to understand. So the first component is key. Communicate the self appropriately. The second one is communication by action, which is pretty self-explanatory. Just the things that you do are going to communicate quite a bit. Kind of rooted behind that idea of don't just say I love you, but show that you love that person. And a lot of people actually aren't even really aware, but even how they're presenting themselves in the present moment is key. Their body language.
Yeah, big time.
If I want to convey that I'm trying to understand the other individual, then I'm going to lean forward, nod along with what they're saying, make eye contact, etc., etc. I'm showing by my body that I'm trying to build that relationship a little bit more. If I'm looking around the room and whistling to myself, then of course I am
You're not paying attention.
Right. Yeah. I'm not going to demonstrate that I'm trying to understand that individual. So 2 components there. I statements, communicating the self appropriately, and then action. And then the third one I would say is the most important one. Active listening. So this one is, I say, the most important because this includes the sole goal of understanding. If we are to come into any interaction with the sole goal of understanding, well then we are naturally going to listen. If we come into an interaction with any other agenda in mind, like let's say I have a perspective and I want you to see that perspective, but I want to change your perspective. I just want you to see my perspective. I don't care about your perspective. Then, of course, that's going to damage that ability to understand both sides. And, of course, I'm not going to be successful in changing your reality or your perspective. So what we do with this active listening is we actually couple it with the first 2. So we have the body language. We're showing that we're attentive and engaged. And then what we do is we reflect out loud. Okay, so what I am understanding of what you're saying is this, this, and this. If my understanding is off, then it gives you the opportunity to correct me, and then you correct me, and then I reflect again. Okay, so what I'm understanding now is this, this, and that. And now we're having a civil dialogue that is going back and forth. That is going to build that understanding, which over time is going to build that trust and respect, strengthen the foundation, and then strengthen the connection in that relationship. So as a parent, it's all about being mindful of how you are interacting with your children. If you want them to be more communicative to you, if you want them to be more open even to other people, well then it begins with you. You have to be the change that you want to see. Just like that idea, the parent has to make all that travel across the way to meet the child where it's at. And then eventually the change occurs naturally.
That was pretty good stuff, man. I'm like, I'm trying to make mental notes because obviously I can't be here with my phone, but I'm like, Remember that. That was good. So if there's an injury, and I feel this happens obviously in all sports, but what strategies can athletes use to cope with emotional challenges of recovering from an injury? And for cheer, and I'm gonna bring up Simone Biles for a second. For cheer, there's a lot of athletes who they have an injury, maybe from, obviously they were doing something from, stunting or like my kid just walks and gets injured. Or at home. But a lot of things are happening because of tumbling. So, and some of the tumbling is pretty dangerous. I mean, no hands. We're out here doing all kinds of flips. And so after they do that tumble pass, and if they get hurt, then there's a mental block there. Like now, kind of like what Simone Biles was talking about, the twisties, right? I get all messed up in my head. I can't process. Like my own daughter has had this with her tucks, which is when you do the back, it's like a tuck in the air and you don't have any hands. And touching the floor. And what happens is she's good now, but maybe about 2 years ago, she told me, I know what I'm supposed to do up here. My body won't listen to my mind. And it took a long time for her to get back into, and it wasn't anything bad that happened. She kind of, we call it when you bail out in a tumbling pass. So pretty much in the middle of the air, you blank out, kind of like what happened to Simone Biles. Like you're like, wait, where am I? Right? Because you're supposed to have your eyes open. You're supposed to know, like, I'm supposed to see the ceiling and come down. And we see that often. And I feel like apart from, a lot of the parents start taking the kids to private lessons. Let's get you in a private lesson. Let's get you back to the basics of tumbling. And that's how it starts. But I don't know mentally if any of these kids are able to say, how do I get out of this up here? Physically, most of them 100% could do it, no problem. But it definitely is that mental coping of, how do I get this fear out of me? And for some was taking that long break, right? Like Simone did. She had to take that long break. And then I watched her documentary, so I'm an expert on this. Don't worry about it.
That's what I was going to recommend, pretty much just taking that break, that mental break that they need.
But if it happens during the middle of a season, they can't take that break. Like cheer, at least for most, I mean, when you have big all-star gyms, they have so many athletes you could pull from everywhere. But most of the time, the parent doesn't want their child to be replaced in the routine, or they don't have someone else to come in and fill. Like for my teams, I don't have a whole bench that I could pull from. And so it becomes now, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? And then you have to, in cheer, have certain level, a certain amount of athletes tumbling to meet the requirements of that score sheet. So if I have 20 athletes, I need to have half plus one of those athletes be tumbling, doing the same levels. I can't have 20 athletes and 7 tumbling because we're not meeting the scores. We might as well not show up. So it's a lot of other parts that come in. But it's a struggle for them. And I feel like the coaches who do private lessons do such a good job of, hey, we're going to start back with the basics, right? Like if you have a back walkover and you're having trouble with that because you hurt your arm, we're just going to start with a cartwheel. We're just going to start with a forward roll. Then we'll start with a back bend. And once you get used to that, then, come over with the legs and little by little. But mentally, I don't know that we're doing anything to say what is going on. And even myself, when she told me my mind is not, like my body's not following. So that was harsh. I was like, I have no idea what to do right now. Except, what most people do. And I just pushed her. Like, just go and do it. Just try it. And her tumbling coach is amazing, and he helps a lot of people with mental blocks, but it's hard. And sometimes even changing those coaches around, like, hey, maybe you need a break and go to this other coach. Not that that was our answer to it, because she's had that tumbling coach now for years and years, but yeah, I don't know what to do, and that's so hard. I mean, I bring up Simone Biles because she did take that break.
Right.
And then she would go in the gym maybe for 30 minutes and just, walk around, and then little by little she introduced herself back in. So yeah, that's so scary to me.
I think, the vast majority would probably stem from just preemptive measures. So, like it almost functions like burnout. You think about it, like just, we've all experienced burnout to some extent.
Not us in nursing.
Yeah, whether it be to schooling or the professional world or even personal life, going out and socializing every day, But that burnout, the cause of that burnout is you not taking care of yourself properly to begin with in the first place. So that's why I say it would probably, the majority of it would stem from these preemptive measures that we're taking, just being proactive in terms of how we take care of ourselves, the self-care routine, like those 5 aspects that I mentioned. But if you're in the burnout itself, it does begin with a rearing back of the degree at which you're pushing yourself. Like, let's say, you're burnt out at work. Now, you may be pushing yourself hard each and every day, and you kind of have to, but then you have those couple days off. Same thing with athletes. So they need those days off, those rest days, or else they're not going to rejuvenate and get to where they need to be.
Yeah, there's no recovery process.
Right. Just like going to the gym, the guys who don't make any gains, but they're going to the gym 7 days a week. The reason why is
not be me.
Right. The reason why is because they're not giving their muscles enough time to rest. So, you exercise 3 days a week, and then you rest for the rest of the week, 4 days.
Right.
And that 4 days will give you that enough time to rest those muscles and then grow, and then you go back. So with this example of cheering and sports with adolescents, is the same idea where, okay, we're pushing them in season constantly. I think as coaches, parents, you look at the individual, and you have to recognize it, because of course that kid is probably not aware that they're going through that experience, and then you gently guide them. Of course, there's only so much that we can do in terms of helping them rear back. We can only guide, we can only provide advice, we can't push them to do those types of things like take a rest, but that gentle encouragement to, okay, hey, how about let's not do some tumbling today? Let's just focus on, this other area within your routine, whatever the case may be. But that change of scenery helps them to get out of that mental funk. Because, of course, if they're continually pushing on the same task, they're never going to solve their problem. Just like working a math problem. If you're on this math problem and you keep erasing and you keep getting the wrong answer, well, forget about that math problem for a moment. Move on, do the other ones, do the rest of the assignment, then come back to it. Then you have a refreshed mindset. I was doing painting the other day, yesterday actually, and I was getting frustrated with the way that my painting was turning out. I was like, okay, I need to take a break. Step away and just focus on something else.
Yeah.
And I focused on something else for a time, and then I came back. And then it was just a rejuvenation of things. That helped me to reset my mind mentally, get out of that funk, and then finish whatever I was working on.
Yeah. I guess, too, I wish that there was maybe a mental health counselor when athletes in a team are experiencing this, or let's say we're, part of a bigger program, someone for them to, hey, maybe that person comes in once a week, and if you need to talk to them, then you're able to. I just feel like there's none of that available. And then there's not in the schools. And then, and parents, we try our best, but then so many things going on all the time, all the things going on. Yeah. So that's difficult. Yeah. So I wonder if investing in a mental health counselor to come in, and I feel like professional teams have those, and
They do.
obviously, but
Yeah.
we're not thinking about cheer for that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that we kind of live in a more individualistic society where we kind of focus on the individual a little bit too much and neglect other people in the process. But that is losing the cornerstone of a society.
Right.
The cornerstone or the basis of society is the family, and as I explained earlier, that family is a collective unit of individuals working on themselves individually, but then also working within that system. And then, of course, you look at the society as it develops, so you have a family who's doing that properly, and then you have a family next door maybe doing that properly as well. And they connect with one another. And they connect with the parents across the street, the families across the street. And now you've got this little neighborhood.
Right.
And now you have this neighborhood who's working as a functional family unit, and then this family unit connects with the neighborhood next door. And so now we're seeing this kind of ripple effect out to the society at large. But because we've gravitated more towards that individualistic idea, as opposed to what it was back in, let's say, the 1950s, we've lost the ability to support one another. And that loss in our ability to support one another is having a great effect on the next generations. All these next generations, they're growing up in these societies where they feel a bit isolated. I mean, look at these iPad kids that are being raised on iPads, and the parents are focusing more so on their own problems as opposed to this child that they brought into the world. And so we have to bring that idea of the family back into that setting in order to cultivate growth and utilize those resources, utilize the community at large. Because if we don't, well then of course we're going to lose our meaning in life.
Right, yeah. I think it would, I don't know if that, I just thought about that too, like having somebody come in to speak to the kids, like, hey, this is happening or that's happening.
It would be very, very beneficial. For
Big
sure.
time, yeah.
Mhm.
So, speaking of iPads and all the things, how does social media impact the mental health of young athletes, especially when it comes to body image, comparison, public perception? Like you were saying, it looks so amazing, and look at all the things I could do. And of course, I'm not putting on there every time my kid's team doesn't really win. Like, I'm not posting those. I'm posting the good routines. Like, look at where we ended and what we're doing. And so how do you think that affects them? I know it affects me as an adult. Like, sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, she's living her best life. Or
But like you said, they just post their
their
best face.
or I feel
forward,
like
you know?
even at my old age of almost 46, there's certain things that I've wanted to do with my life that I haven't been able to do, and I may or may not get there. And so when I see others, obviously I'm comparing myself. I mean, that's
And that's
human
what
nature.
the kids do. That's essentially what they do, especially with body image, body dysmorphia and all of these sorts of things. And then, of course, that goes down a very dangerous road with creating depression and all these other sorts of situations. So I think it has to be properly managed, and also monitored, because a lot of these kids, they just have access to all of these, Instagram and TikToks and all of these social media accounts that if they're not properly managed, then they can get into these situations. And as well as bullying. There's a lot of that going on in social media.
Yeah. And the body image is big
huge.
too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's it really is kind of cultivating this idealistic image of the self. How do you overcome that? It's a difficult question. It really is. I mean, for the kids, I don't think it would be really beginning with them and recognizing how to combat it. It would begin with just this top-down approach of how the family looks at it, how the parents look at it. I mean, I, for one, I don't have any kids right now, but when I do, I think that I'm going to be that parent that doesn't allow my children to have access to social media until they're of an age where they can think a little bit more critically about their existence and be able to discern what is right and wrong and what is realistic in life. At least that would be my own personal approach. It's really kind of a new phenomenon though. I mean, we live in a technological age, and there's a lot of good things that come from technology, but there is a lot of not so great things. And I think we're still trying to cipher through what is actually good from this experience and what is actually bad. I mean, there are some obvious bad things. We've seen, people who are just this increase in suicidality over the past, several decades. And you ask yourself the question, well, why is that? Why? Well, I mean, it could start with the societal issues of just that, how macroly we're looking at the individual. But then again, with that same statement, I think of even just other countries that have kind of a different idea. So we live in this first world country that's individualistic, and then we look at maybe a first world country in East Asia, and they're more collectivist. But if we really were to study a little bit further, we can begin to identify that they still even have the same problems that we do. So where do we begin to even approach this situation? Well, then let's gravitate away from the first world countries and let's look at third world countries. Now, how are they? Are they happy? Well, some might say they are. I mean, you look at children in Africa and they're smiling, happy, and yet they're starving. They don't have much in life, but they don't really have a choice. We have a choice. We have a choice to escape. And these devices, they give us that escape from reality. And so the more that we escape from reality, the more afraid we're going to be of it, and the less we're going to grow. So that could be one way of kind of beginning to analyze what we can do for ourselves. I mean, looking at those third world countries that are poverty-stricken and war-torn, or whatever the case may be, we can learn a thing or two. But then, of course, again, like I said, there are good benefits of having technology in this age.
I will say that, and I've suggested this before, just obviously not to the right people, but I've just said it out loud. Sometimes even in my cheer practice or even with my own kids, and giving them, getting them a cell phone probably earlier than what maybe they should have it, but it's more out of sometimes necessity, because your kids are in different sports, and if will call me if something happens or whatever, and you're not allowed to be there. But what I've seen is, apart from the social media, is also with the etiquette with the messages, and like if they're in a group message, it'll be like, well, stop messaging because I'm having dinner. Like, if you're in a group message, that's what it is. You don't tell people when you're ready for them to send a text on a group message. I feel like there should be a class, going back to the schools, on etiquette for all of these things. On, hey, social media is for this. Please know that it's superficial. If you're in a group chat, this is what you expect in a group chat. It might go off all day. You can't tell people, well, stop it because it's time for me to study. Like, delete yourself from the group chat. Like, remove yourself. So I feel like all those things play a role. And they're younger and younger and getting these devices and getting all these, like the Roblox, for instance. So many of them play Roblox, and anybody could go in there and do scary. Super scary. And so, but I feel that all plays into, the mental health of athletes and children in general, of how they might, I know I as an adult compare myself sometimes, which I know I shouldn't, but it's difficult for sure. And it's not like it's going to stop. I just feel like we need to educate ourselves.
Right.
Well, then also practicing what we preach. Like as a parent, if you're on your phone and telling your kid to be off their phone, it's like, what kind of message are you sending to them right now? Like, I think growing up, my family and I kind of made this kind of unsaid rule of not having any devices at the dinner table and having an actual sit-down conversation with one another every single night. And I think that was one way of my parents trying to build some sort of connectedness within the family. And we are a very strong family unit altogether because of those small little efforts that we made. It wasn't a huge ask. I mean, dinner only lasted, maybe sometimes less than 20 minutes because some people are fast eaters. But regardless, we made that extra effort to just connect, build that relationship a little bit more. The relationship is not on a device. It's not on the dark web or online or anywhere. It's right in front of you. So connect with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so what are some effective coping mechanisms young athletes could use to manage the stress and anxiety? Did we touch on that already?
I think we did a little bit with the coping skills and
Yeah, grounding. There's a number of different things like DBT is a very good approach that provides an array of different coping skills. If you look at the 4 pillars of DBT, it's mindfulness, it's emotion regulation, distress tolerance, and interpersonal effectiveness. And Marsha Linehan, she has just put a great deal of effort into putting together this massive workbook that just lists all of these coping skills that we can try on a day-to-day. The idea behind coping skills, again, is really just to shift your attention to something else. It's a distraction. Phones can be a coping skill to an extent, but if it becomes to an excess where you're escaping reality, then it becomes an ineffective coping skill.
Right.
And so we have to identify what are effective coping skills for us. What's going to help us shift our attention to the here and now. If we're feeling anxious, worrying about that exam tomorrow or that cheer competition that's happening tomorrow, well, that is off in the distance. That's something outside of our control. Recognize that you're anxious and then say, okay, what can I focus on right now? And the more that you can focus on right now, the more that you can calm down. Kind of like that idea of, have you ever found yourself kind of struggling to sleep at night? It's probably oftentimes
every night, yeah.
You're thinking about tomorrow. Well, the age-old kind of cliche is, well, start counting your sheep.
Because you're just focusing on...
Yes, that idea is a mental gymnastic for yourself. If you shift your attention on just the simple task of counting 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep, and then counting them come out, then eventually you will fall into that slumber that you so desire.
Right. Yeah. I feel like my coping skill is going to the pantry. I probably don't need to be doing that. Okay, next question. How can young athletes develop resilience to handle the ups and downs of their sports?
Be willing to embrace the downs.
Yeah.
Because they're inevitable. That's the only way that you're going to build resilience.
Yeah, that's a perfect answer. Yeah. Know that
it's going to happen. You're going to not be successful every single time.
Right. And I try, and even when I have like my parent meetings, I tell them, I'm like, your child is going to come home and say, today was not a good practice. But your goal is to say, how do we move forward from that, right? Instead of like, it's not a good practice. I'm not going back. Next practice, I'm going to, say I'm sick and not show up. The goal is to show up. You know what I mean? So, yeah. But that's good. Yeah. Embrace the downs. Okay, next question. What is the role... Oh, here we go. This is on me. What is the role of a coach in supporting an athlete's mental health? We also touched on that a little bit. And again, it's that trust.
Yes, and building the trust, meeting the individual where they're at, and that's going to cultivate that relationship, and then both individuals are going to flourish from there.
Yeah, and I feel with competitive cheer, not so much with my teams because we have a short season, but normal competitive cheer teams are together and practicing, like the season is 11 months long. So those coaches really have, the time to build those relationships and get to know those kids. Even I feel too, as kids grow up and more, the hormones, and you might have an athlete one year and they might not be the same person the next for different reasons, whether good or bad. So getting to know them again, and I feel like the team bondings, even when the coaches go to those, that's super helpful to get to know.
Never make an assumption in life.
Yeah.
You should never assume that you know something. I mean, even thinking of one of the greatest, wisest men in history, Socrates, he once said, "How could I be the wisest man in history? I know nothing about myself."
Yeah.
So that was him eliminating all his assumptions about what he knew. He knew wisely that he knew nothing.
Yeah.
And so we could take that and run with that and say, okay, well, I knew this person yesterday, but they may be somebody different today. So I'm going to meet that person where they're at right now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good advice. Okay, so I think that's it. We are done with our questions, you guys. It's time for the send-off round, which is our lightning round.
Okay.
Are you ready?
I'm excited.
Okay. What
Sam's got all the questions, all the answers.
All the answers, Sam. Here we go. All right, first question. What youth sport would you say causes the most mental stress? Do you think there's one more than the other?
I don't think there's a difference, because there's you're competing in all of them, so that competition makes it equivalent, in my opinion.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. I mean, I'm biased to cheer, of course. I think cheer's super hard. But
It is. No, it is.
But yeah, I think there's some that, I don't know, I think all of them. When I was here with, when I had my concussion episode, she said that, cheer, one of the most dangerous things is obviously concussions, and that what she has seen, that concussions are high in soccer and cheer, and that's usually the two sports that are getting the most concussions. Which
I was pretty surprised when I heard that. I thought it would be football or something else. Yeah,
but it's not.
I know.
Yeah, it's kind of scary.
It's kind of scary.
I think those individual sports, like more focused on the individual, may be a little bit more detrimental. Like if I think of like the Olympic athletes again, you look at some of these sports like let's say gymnastics. That's very much the same as something like ice skating, and both are. I mean, gymnastics has that team portion aspect of things, but individually, if you're not performing at your best, well, then it affects the rest of the team.
Yeah.
But things like sports like football or basketball, I mean, you could have a bad game, but if the rest of the team is doing well, then you're still going to have a good outcome. So I think those sports where they gravitate a little bit more towards individual focused and the impacts the individuals have might have a greater impact on the psyche.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are your thoughts on participation medals or trophies in youth sports? Like, how do you think that affects young athletes?
I think positive reinforcement is always good.
So you're in for the... I think it shouldn't be. I think there should be a first, second, and third, and everybody else go home.
Yeah.
Because that's the reality of life.
It is the reality.
Sorry.
You can't always be a winner.
No.
Right. Yeah. I think, I mean, just like the last question that you asked on your list, it's those downs are inevitable. So if you kind of disregard those, throw those to the wayside and say, oh, no, actually, good job for participating. What is that doing for the kid?
Nothing.
It's
They
not
showed
really,
up, Sam.
I mean, yeah, sure. That's hard.
Marcella's sending everybody home with a medal.
It is good to positively reinforce. But we also want to instill that
that's
discipline and that idea that I do have to push myself a little bit more than I used to.
Right,
Yeah.
they want to achieve that first place.
Yeah, and I think with cheer, everybody gets most of the time everybody gets a banner, or when my teams go to cheer, they get a trophy, but that trophy is very different from that first place. You start fifth, fourth, third.
Yeah.
So you could tell, even if you're getting something, at least in that aspect, all right, well, this is very tiny. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. I get they're all, when they're 2 and playing soccer and it's so cute.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I don't think it's helping. I think after a while, like...
At what age do you think that it would be appropriate?
To what? And to stop giving them that?
Yeah, to stop giving them a participation trophy. Because I can understand for like...
I think if you're a
young
second
kids,
grader or up, that's enough.
Yeah. So where they are beginning to develop those more critical thinking skills. And
Yeah. Am I messing these kids up? I don't know if I'm doing them a disservice, but I just think that some people are going to win, some people are not, and this is what happens.
Mm-hmm.
Good for the kids who won. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that is life and that is reality. So if that's
But
how
you
you want to
think-
look at it.
She rolled her eyes. She does not like that. She does not like that. Well, what do you think they shouldn't? No more
Right, no
participation.
more participation trophies. But also, I'm very competitive at heart. Like, I played a lot of sports growing up.
Same.
I played football, baseball, I did rugby in college. So, a lot of these kind of hard-hitting sports, but it always pushed me to my limits.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved that as a just naturally competitive. Some people are not naturally competitive, though.
Yeah.
And so for those individuals, maybe they would benefit from the participation trophy, but they're not going to excel as much as those people who have that personality to be a little bit more competitive.
Yeah.
Because it always irked my gears, at least growing up, seeing other people get these trophies, and I was like, I put in all this hard work, and this guy gets the same trophy as me?
But I think at the same time, you don't know where they are mentally, and so that can also do a lot of good for them if they just get something for showing.
Yes. Yeah.
Because the people that are very competitive, they're going to keep going forward regardless of whether they get it or not.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
But, 7 years old and you're done. Name a key mental health benefit of being part of a competitive cheer team, would you say? Obviously being part of the team, I would say.
I think there are so many, exercise, they get all their exercise, they even eat healthier, they are, I'm just thinking ahead, like of my own kids, like those are actually some of the main ones that they get their exercise and they love it and they get to be a part of a team, so they get that like feeling of belonging somewhere.
I agree.
And the mental toughness that I feel it builds.
Oh yeah.
Right,
yeah.
The resilience for sure. It's the sense of belongingness, I think, is the most important thing. I mean, when we understand meaning in life, it's always rooted in that connection with something. You ask anybody what their meaning in life is, like a mom, for instance, what are they going to say? Their children, most often, or their family, or something in relation to that. But that is them connecting. And also they have an identity. They identify as a mom. So same with an athlete. So they're a part of a team. They identify as a cheerleader. That helps them to feel like they belong to a group. And that gives them some sort of meaning, purpose, and motivation to continue on forward. If they quit being a cheerleader, they kind of almost feel like they betrayed somebody else.
Yeah.
Right. Again, their why. Why are they doing this, you know? And so this is important.
I'm going to ask all of them that. What's your why? What's your why? What is a sign that a cheerleader is experiencing mental fatigue, would you say? For us parents and coaches that we need to...
Pretty much the signs of depression. So irritability, withdrawal, their eating patterns that are disordered, like either eating too much or eating too little.
Maybe sleeping.
Same with sleep.
Yeah.
Sleeping too much or sleeping too little.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's really kind of analyzing what other areas are being affected. Like in the beginning, I was talking about the 5 aspects. So if one of those aspects, like the physical nature aspect, is neglected, well then it's going to show signs in the mental, the emotional, the social, and the mindful aspect of things. So on the outside, you can pretty easily identify those things. They may not be able to, but you can. And then what you do is you just inquire. Hey, I notice you're a little kind of lethargic, or you're not really
yourself
paying attention very much. What's going on? And then you explore it a little bit more. And of course, that works into building that relationship a little bit more and meeting the person where they're at.
Yeah. I think sometimes too, in general with these athletes, you know, and again, it's building that trust with them and that relationship, because then you do get to see like, you're off today. And sometimes they'll tell you like, I had a hard day, my test, this and that. But yeah, and then you could move from there. And then at least for me, I'll be like, okay, so now I know. I don't have to continue to ask, because that would be me too. Why? What's going on?
Or
Are
they
you
didn't
okay?
sleep well, or they didn't eat breakfast or lunch, or anything like that.
Yeah. What would you say to parents who their athlete isn't having the best season, for example, and they kind of want to give up and say, I don't want to do it anymore? But as a parent, sometimes you're like I don't know if that happened to you, right, in rugby, or, you know, you had a hard season and you went home and you were like, I'm done. But you know that's probably not the best outcome. And from my experience, what I've seen when athletes, at least in cheer, when they're like, I don't want to do it anymore, and the parents are like, okay, take a year off, what happens when they go back most of the time, not all of the time, don't come for me, is that they're not at the level where they were. And so now they're falling back, right? If they were a level 4 athlete, maybe they end up on a level 3 team because you took that whole year off. And I don't know, that's difficult for a parent to manage, because do you really need the year off? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But yeah, that comes back to...
Yeah. I can just answer that as a parent, honestly. I feel like when my kids have said, I don't want to do this anymore, just because they had one bad practice, I tell them, well, you signed up for it, and this is something that you committed yourself to do, and so you're going to finish it off. If you need some time off, if we need to talk, if we need to, kind of modify the plan, but you're going to continue what you're doing, because this is part of growing up, and you have to be responsible. So that's...
But if one of your
I've
kids comes
handled
home
it.
and says, I don't want to do it next year at all.
Yeah, I've had that situation also. And then when it's time to sign up, it's like, oh, what are you talking about? I am signing up. I do love cheer.
Yeah.
They change their minds so much.
Yeah,
too,
that's true. I'm a big believer that, and I have parents who are like, my kid's not doing it next year. That's okay. I just hate for, like, to see, well, what are you going to do? But you got to do something, because we're not sitting on the couch and just hanging out.
Definitely.
So what are we doing? What are we thinking?
Right.
So whenever they come up and they're like, I'm going to do volleyball, or I'm going to do, then great. As long as we're not like just hanging out, because then I think that's worse.
Oh yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I think it would be more on the lines of kind of almost encouraging them to discern it a little bit further, because what they're experiencing initially is that pain. But as we understand pain, it is only temporary. And so if that is truly what they want, then of course we respect it. But we encourage them, okay, I hear you, I understand. I mean, it's difficult. If you don't want to do it, I respect that decision. But think about it. Think about it before you actually make the decision. Because we don't want you to, months down the road say, I actually want to do this.
That was exactly the conversation we had. And then when it came time to practice and, cheer tryouts, I was like, what are you talking about? I do love this. I am doing it. But it was like, think about it, because if you don't want to do it, that's fine. I respect your decision.
Right.
Yeah,
I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. I guess it all depends on the situation, but it is kind of, at least for me as a parent, I'm like, what do you mean we've invested all these years in the sport? And again, it comes to, how much do you push them? Some of them have, like my daughter's 14, she's been doing cheer since she was 6. So if next year she would be like, I'm done, like I would understand that. You've been doing it for a long, long time. So we go back to that burnout situation of, what do we want to do, and do you want to continue, and maybe you need to change your path, maybe you need to look into something else. So yeah, awesome. That's it. That was the send-off round, you guys. No more questions. No more questions. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. Thanks, you guys, for listening and watching. We will catch you on the sidelines of the Cheer Chronicles podcast.